Alrighty, so here we are.
Yeah.
If you guys are watching this, you guys probably know that we're usually behind the camera, usually not in front of the camera.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a little different today. What are we here talking about, John?
Well, I think we're here going to talk a little bit about what I think we both think is probably the most significant issue when it comes to our country and what it is, why it's dangerous, and hopefully what we can do about it.
Yeah.
And we essentially have two forms of government.
Yeah.
We have our constitutional government, the three branches, and then we have this extra constitutional government that exists completely outside of the Constitution, called the administrative state, which operates completely differently on different principles.
You may have heard, the term the deep state, but you may not really know what it is.
It's like, well, what is it?
It's like, well, it's because they don't understand really what it is or how it works.
And that is intentional, because they don't want it to be clearly understood by us. And the technical term, the best descriptor for it is the administrative state. The administrative state, it does oppress the American people. And they might not know that it's coming from the administrative state, but you can feel it manifesting in all these different ways.
It's a term that you can define, that you can research historically, and that is an actual form of government that is currently the way we govern in America today.
Yeah. Administrative state government is fundamentally different because there is no representation.
It's no longer the consent of the governed that our government is governing. It's quite the opposite.
We did not consent to any of these agencies. They're not elected by us. We don't have the power to vote them out. Even the president can't really fire them individually. Congress doesn't really have much control over them because they fund themselves.
So not only is there not consent, but when we say, hey, stop, you don't have our consent,
they ignore it.
They still do it anyways.
The big myth in America right now is that laws are made in Congress. They are absolutely not. Administrative state is utilized by both Republican and Democrat presidents. They wield all three powers of government: legislative, executive, and judicial. Elections won't matter, and voting rights won't matter until the people that we elect through voting are the ones who actually do the governing.
Voting is the one way that we, as people, wield government. And if we don't have that, we just have a totally rogue government. There's no other way to control a government besides force. It's the same question that we asked ourselves in 1776. The same question we asked in the Civil War is simply, do you have the right to self-govern?
In actuality, that is the administrative state coercing these companies to censor your free speech.
There's no rule of law in the country. This might be the very most important video that you watch. This video is not, for Republican issues, not for Democrat issues. This is literally affects everybody. So this video is simply to kind of inform everyone on some issues that you may not really know that much about, or maybe you've heard about them. A lot of people will know of the administrative state through terms like the deep state, the swamp, things like that. The issue with those titles is that that's all they really ever are just like top layer titles. They don't ever really go into a whole lot of detail of how it works, who the names, and why it's a problem.
It obscures the problem. Because it's too vague.
Yes.
It just has this like ominous sounding clickbaity label that you can use to kind of smear whoever you really want, if you don't define your terms. So yeah, but what it really refers to is the administrative state, which is a little more of a a historical, scholarly term, I suppose.
Yeah, it's a term that you can define, that you can research historically, and that is an actual form of government that is currently the way we govern in America today.
Yeah.
That a lot of people don't know.
Yeah, and we essentially have two forms of government.
Yeah.
We have our constitutional government, the three branches that were created with the Constitution. And then we have this completely other extra-constitutional government that exists completely outside of the Constitution, called the administrative state, which operates completely differently on different principles. Yeah.
You know, this is a video that is important not to just a Democrat or just to a Republican, but even people who aren't political.
Yeah.
That's something that is, I know I have a lot of friends, I know a lot of people that are like, oh, well, I'll just stay out of it. Like, you know, I disagree with both of them, and so I don't have a dog in the fight.
And there's a saying that says, you might not care about politics, but politics cares about you. And it's going to affect your daily life, whether you know about it or not.
Yeah.
So.
And the thing is the more it gets involved, the more people are going to know about it. That traditionally either have a stance of being apolitical or just not caring because they're just not into politics.
Yeah.
Which I get it. Politics and government are, they can be boring. It can seem like, why does it matter to me? And yeah.
One of the reasons why is maybe because people don't think that their vote actually matters.
Yeah, no, and that's 100% true. You know, that's part of it too. A lot of people have that train of thought. But
I don't think a lot of people know why their vote doesn't actually matter.
Yeah, because a lot of people, they do. They have this intrinsic feeling or knowing that their votes don't matter, but they may not exactly know why. When it comes to me, when it comes to like really important stuff, like for instance, whenever I am teaching someone, when it comes to like firearms instruction, whenever we take like a new shooter to the range to go shoot, the first thing I tell them is like, this isn't stuff that I just came up with, because, you know, you're around a weapon. It's, you know, it could be potentially a dangerous situation where they would be needing to use that weapon. So it's important, at least for me, that everyone that I teach knows that like, this isn't stuff that I just came up with. This is stuff that I went and learned from professionals in the industry. So whenever just like I'm on the range teaching like a new shooter stuff, I'm not just teaching them stuff that I just think or my opinion or you know, vice versa. It's so important that they learn the correct and safe ways to do that and the whys behind it from people that are actually professionals. And so a lot of stuff that we're going to talk about in this video is not really our opinions at all. It is simply either historical fact and historical accounts and or from professionals in the field of administration and government and those topics.
Yeah, because I think, personally, I think one of the problems with it is that it's not very well known, at least until maybe very recently. And a lot of people haven't heard about it. They don't know how it works. And so it can kind of sound a little bit like a conspiracy theory, but it's absolutely not. It's something that's very well known and discussed in like academia, like legal scholars and political scientists have written books about it since the 30s.
Yeah, and one of the reasons people don't know about it, because it's extremely, it's very boring, it's very dull. There's a really good quote from Woodrow Wilson explaining it. I'm gonna pull it up real quick. Let's see.
Woodrow Wilson being one of the people who wrote the book on administration or administrative government.
Mm-hmm. So in Woodrow Wilson's This is a quote from The Study of Administration by Woodrow Wilson. Is one cannot easily make clear to everyone just where administration resides in the various departments of any practicable government without entering upon particulars so numerous as to confuse and distinctions so minute as to distract. No lines of demarcation setting apart administrative from non-administrative functions can be run between this and that department of government without being run up hill and down dale, over dizzy heights of distinction and through dense jungles of statutory enactment. Hither and thither around, ifs and buts, whens and howevers, until they become altogether lost to the common eye, not accustomed to the sort of surveying, and consequently not acquainted with the use of the theodolite of logical discernment. A great deal of administration goes about incognito to most of the world, being confounded now with political management and again with constitutional principle. So break down a little bit what he's saying there.
Essentially, in that paper, Woodrow Wilson is talking about the difference between politics and administration. Administration is a new type of government for the progressives. And what he's talking about there is that administration is so dense and so boring and so complicated. Like, it has so many different aspects, so many different departments, executive agencies, rules, regulations, that it's just a tangled web of confusion that the common people, it goes unnoticed. He says it goes incognito to the common eye. So it's out of sight, out of mind, and that is intentional because they don't want it to be clearly understood by us, because if we did understand it, we might have a serious problem with it. Mm-hmm. So even if you are unaware of what the administrative state is, it absolutely affects your everyday life. If you think about like social media censorship, you might misidentify the cause of that and think it's coming from social media companies. In actuality, that is the administrative state coercing these companies to censor your free speech.
So real quick, let's go over what is the problem, what is administrative state, why is it a problem?
Sure.
Because a lot of people haven't heard, this isn't a super common term used, administrative state. Mm-hmm. It's more used in political science and universities, and if you're studying government, because it is a form of government.
Yeah, it is a form of government, and that's really important, I think, because it's a different form of government that's foreign to the constitutional form of government that America was founded on. So I think you said, like, what is it? It's essentially, if you break it down, you have to contrast it with constitutional republican government, which is what America is. It's a constitutional republic.
Which is the form of government we were given, or we acquired with the Constitution, not given, but we acquired it through the Constitution.
And we, the people, created it through the Constitution. We created our government, and we created it as a constitutional republic, specifically a federal constitutional republic. But the administrative state is a different form of government in a lot of ways, and it was created by the progressives. It's different because it's not a republic. A republic, there's a quote, which I can read it actually.
Yeah, pull it up.
There's a quote from James Madison, who is the father of the Constitution. He wrote the thing, so I think he knows what type of government we have. And so, in the Federalist Papers, Federalist 39, James Madison defines a republic. He says, "We may define a republic to be a government which derives all its powers directly or indirectly from the great body of the people, and is administered by persons holding their offices during pleasure, for a limited time, or during good behavior. So a republic is very simply, it's a government of the people through elected representatives. And in Latin, it means res publica. It means the public thing. So it belongs to the public, the people. Administrative state government is fundamentally different because there is no representation in the administrative state. We have no elected representatives in these federal executive agencies that do most of the governing. It's a bureaucracy. And bureaucracy is simply a combination of words: bureau, which is French for office, and cracy, which is a suffix, which means to rule. So it's a rule by the officials, no longer a rule by the people. So that's the difference.
A lot of people don't know that, or they know it, but they don't really understand it or why. Or
it's so like, even with that information, like, why is that bad? Like, why is having a republic better than a bureaucracy? Why is it better to rule yourself than to be ruled by government officials? The administrative state, it does oppress the American people. And they might not know that it's coming from the administrative state, but you can feel it manifesting in all these different ways. Because essentially, when the government wants to enact a policy, the administrative state is the arm that they use to carry it out. So like free speech being censored, it is the administrative state agencies who actually form those policies, then enforce them, and this is a fact. It's been demonstrated in a court case, Missouri v. Biden, that the FBI and CDC coerced social media platforms into censoring speech that was protected by the First Amendment. They coerced them with threats and pressure that if they didn't comply, they would take action against these companies. In other ways, it's like during all the COVID lockdowns, the CDC, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, all of these tyrannical acts are all carried out, in effect, by administrative state agencies. Even when it comes down to like drug legalization, the DEA actually has the power to decide what drugs are controlled substances or not. They'll take a drug like D8 THC and say it's fine, but a drug like D8 THCO and say that it's a controlled substance. It's not decided by our legislators, our elected representatives in Congress. The decisions are made by unelected, unaccountable, all-powerful bureaucrats in these particular agencies.
So you have the people in these agencies that are making up laws, basically, because, you know, the excuse that they say is that, you know, well, these are rules, they're not laws. What is, in the founding's idea, what did they say laws were? What pertained?
It kind of goes back before the founding, because use a little reference point is the Second Treatise of Government is written by an English philosopher named John Locke. And the idea is that the power of making law belongs to the people. It's their natural power to make law. And when they form a society or a government, the people grant that power to particular people. We call them legislators. They are lawmakers. But they only get their power as a grant from the people. Like, it's my power, it's your power, everyone's watching. You have the power to make laws, and you've only given it to your chosen lawmakers. And these laws are binding on everyone else in the society. And that's why it's really important that laws are only made by chosen lawmakers. Because if you haven't consented to these laws, you had no say in writing them, and they have no authority to be binding on you.
Right, because what people don't know is that these rules are that come from these agencies, they're not made by Congress. Usually there's some sort of generalized, basically, message or edict from Congress in these laws they pass, telling an agency, hey agency, there's this industry, go basically make a rule regarding this industry, like make it up.
Yeah, and that's actually really important too, because if we start with the idea that the people have the authority to make law, and we delegate it to lawmakers, they don't get to turn around and give away that power to other people that we haven't chosen. Mm-hmm. It's a principle called the non-delegation doctrine. And it basically says that the legislature doesn't have the authority to transfer the power of making law to anyone else that the people didn't choose. Mm-hmm. And that's essentially what a big myth in America right now is that laws are made in Congress. They are absolutely not.
Yeah.
Every time Congress passes a bill, an act, what they essentially do is through these acts of Congress, they don't make laws. They delegate legislative power to the executive branch, who in turn actually writes the laws. I think for the past decade, and these are statistics, you can look them up, over
and we'll put a lot of these things either if there's a description of this video or somewhere where you can look at sources.
Yeah, but like I was saying, over the last decade, over 90% of laws are written by executive agencies, not Congress. I think in 2022, I think like over 3,000 rules and regulations were issued by the administrative state, and only like 247 laws were passed by Congress.
Yeah, I forget the exact numbers. That's what I was looking for. But yeah, like there's literally usually multiple thousands of laws that are made by executive agencies, which they are laws. And we'll explain why in a second.
And it's not just us saying that there are laws.
No.
The court has ruled that these rules, in effect, carry the same force as laws.
Yeah, because you can still be convicted by these, supposedly they're just rules. You can be fined by these rules, and you can be put in prison.
Yeah.
I forgot what I was saying. But yeah, so like the majority of laws today are not made in Congress, period.
That's a fact.
It's over 90% are made in executive agencies. The ones that are passed in Congress, granted, I'll be honest, I don't know the answer to this, but the other, less than 10% of laws, we don't know how many of those are simply just delegation laws.
Yeah.
Basically laws telling X agency, hey, go make rules regarding this industry.
Yeah.
Or
because laws.
So essentially, we literally almost make no laws in Congress.
Yeah, because laws are supposed to be easy to understand, supposed to be uniform, it's supposed to be established, well known. Like you have to know, if you look at a law, you should know what you can't do and what happens if you do it. But these congressional acts are really not laws.
So let's get some examples.
Just one example. If Congress passes an act called like the Clean Water Act, it's not a law. It's an act that they tell the EPA, we want to have clean water, okay? And then the EPA takes that power that Congress has illegally given them, and they write the actual laws, rules and regulations describing what you can't do and what happens if you do it. And I know there's one case called Joe Robertson versus the EPA, where the EPA's regulations decided that he couldn't dig ponds. So Joe Robertson was a 77-year-old Navy veteran living in Montana, and is kind of in a rural part of the country. And he wanted to dig ponds so he could collect water to help fight forest fires. And the EPA, according to their regulations, that was illegal. And so not only did they charge him with a crime
On his own property.
on his own property.
His own private property.
But they convicted and sentenced him to like 18 months
And
in
how old
prison.
was he?
He was 77 years old, and they put him in prison for 18 months and fined him $130,000. He served his time in prison, and he died shortly after getting out of prison. And after he died, the Supreme Court, the case was litigated all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ordered the lower court, the Ninth Circuit, to overturn his conviction and vacate their previous ruling and give him the money back. So this poor guy had to serve 2 years towards the end of his life in prison, not because of anything Congress made, but just unaccountable administrators.
It just literally just made up.
They made it up without any authority to do so.
With no authority, no consent of the government. I just wanted to read this because I think it's important for people, because we're saying a lot of things and like saying like, oh, like these administrative agencies are illegal and stuff, but like it's important just sometimes to go and look and give examples. So like in Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution, which is the law of the United States.
That's actually kind of like one point right there.
Sure.
A lot of people don't seem to realize this, but the Constitution is law. It is the supreme law of the land. It's the first and fundamental law of the United States. And so anytime it's violated, it is breaking the law.
Yeah, it's breaking the law. And we'll talk about why that's important too. So Article 1, Section 1, and right here, it just simply says, all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of the Senate and House of Representatives. So these are the only people that are allowed to legislate.
Yeah.
Yet we have this fourth branch of government illegally lawmaking and legislating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Literally. Like, this is literally the very first article and first section.
Yeah, other than the preamble, it's the first thing the Constitution says, and it's broken on the daily.
On the daily. And no one's held accountable for it.
No, they're not held accountable because of other doctrines that aren't in the Constitution that are made up by courts, like qualified immunity, where government officials can't be held liable for violating people's rights. That's something that, like, oh gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's one example. Yeah. There's also another example that I wanted to bring up was a court case called EPA versus Choice Refrigerant. And basically, the EPA came up to this, or the EPA just randomly decided that in the industry of refrigerant, and I don't know much about the refrigeration industry, but or even what it's really called, but in that industry, they basically just made up or decided that they were going to cut a certain percentage of the industry down, right? Yeah. And in doing so, they also made an edict. There was this company called Choice Refrigerant, and they had made a product of some sort of refrigerant. It's technical, so I don't really know much about it. But I just know simply they had a product.
It's a small business.
Yeah, it's a small business. This was a small business that made this product for their industry. And during this process of eliminating unilaterally just of the different companies and places that they were going to downsize this percentage of this industry, they told Choice Refrigerant, one, your product is illegal to make, and two, basically you're out of business. Like, you have to shut down your business.
Yeah.
Simply because we have decided unilaterally that you're going to downsize.
Yeah. Yeah, people don't understand that all of the regulatory burden that's placed on the American economy, it disproportionately affects small businesses. Mm-hmm. Now, businesses, on average, need to pay about $12,000 per employee per year in order to comply with all these administrative state regulations. That's a lot. The administrative state is like a $2 trillion per year suck on the American economy. While at the same time, a lot of these agencies, they're funded at our expense, either through our taxpayer dollars, which Congress gives them, or sometimes they're not even funded by Congress. Like, for instance, the FCC, 100% of their budget is funded through the fees they charge the people they regulate. So they write the regulations on these people, these companies, individuals and industries, and they profit off of enforcing their own regulations.
And speaking of that, we might be going back to the actual text a couple times, because I just think it's important for people to see why it's wrong. Because it's like, well, why is this wrong? Why is this wrong? It's like, well, because it's illegal, like word for word. I gotta find it, but okay, here it is. Okay. Here it is. All right, so this is 5, 6. This is Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. So, right here in Section 8, it talks about that Congress is the only one that has the power to collect all these. And, all these are basically fines and or taxes, fees, things you have to do to give money to the government. Mm-hmm. And so right here, whenever there's any sort of fee or tax, or the ways that these agencies are sustaining themselves financially is illegal.
And it's been shown to be illegal in some cases, because going along with that, Congress has the power of the purse, and only Congress.
Only Congress.
Another part of the Constitution, Article 1, Section 9, specifically states that no money shall be drawn from the Treasury, but in consequence of appropriations made by law. So Congress has to appropriate funds from the Treasury in a law in order to draw money. But agencies like the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, doesn't apply to them. They, I kid you not, they self-fund themselves by directly requisitioning funds from the Federal Reserve. So they just go to the Federal Reserve and they say, we need this much money. And the Federal Reserve has to give it to them. Like, there's no congressional review or congressional oversight of some of these agencies' budgets. And why is that bad? Okay, who cares about budgets? Like, it's just dumb economist talk.
Yeah.
Well, have you noticed the price of groceries going up?
Yeah.
Have you noticed that the money that you get paid is worth, I think, 12% less than it was 2 years ago? Like, prices are, like, it affects everybody. It doesn't care if you care about politics or the economy. It affects you either way.
So we've shown kind of some of the examples of how it's affected people individually.
Can we talk about the ATF at all?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think this is a good example of
the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms.
Yeah. And it's just a good example of how the administrative state is utilized by both Republican and Democrat presidents. They don't discriminate. They have the power, or they think they do, and they're going to use it. So Donald Trump had ordered his Department of Justice and the ATF to ban a type of firearm accessory called bump stocks. And by the way, the ATF had previously ruled or decided that bump stocks were perfectly legal in the years prior. But in order to carry out the president's wishes, the ATF had to rewrite the legal definition of machine gun. So the ATF came up with a rule that rewrote the law without any authority to do so, that changed the definition of machine gun to now include guns with bump stocks. And they're still trying to enforce it. Of course, they've been sued in court, and they are losing because what they did was illegal. But in the exact same manner, President Joe Biden ordered his DOJ and ATF to ban a type of firearm accessory called pistol stabilizing braces. Again, it's a type of stock or brace. In order to do so, the ATF did the exact same thing. Because the ATF had previously said that these types of accessories were perfectly legal, they had to go and rewrite the law that was written by Congress to include, they rewrote the definition of rifle to include these pistol stabilizing braces in order to ban them. Both of those things are being litigated right now, and the ATF is losing on both cases, but in both cases, they made, in the bump stock scenario, they made like 500,000 innocent Americans felons overnight, which carries consequences up to 10 years in prison and like a $10,000 fine. And with the pistol braces, the ATF just overnight, without any act of Congress, they made about 3 million Americans felons. Criminal penalties, again, 10 years in prison or $10,000 fine, or both, without any act of Congress. In fact, Congress acted to stop the ATF's pistol brace rule. The House passed an actual congressional disapproval of the ATF's rule, and the House passed it by probably like 20-something votes, and it failed in the Senate by 1 vote, 50 to 49. So it takes the process by which we normally create law, it passes the House, passes the Senate, and signed by the president, and it inverts it. The agency unilaterally creates a law, and in order to stop it, it has to be passed by the House and the Senate and signed by the president.
So that's insane.
Yes.
It's insane because that's the perfect example of it's no longer the consent of the government that our government is governing. It's quite the opposite.
Yeah, and one of the reasons why that's so important is like that's why it's legally wrong. It's legally wrong to break the law, the Constitution, but why is it like fundamentally like morally wrong? And part of it is government by consent. We did not consent to any of these agencies. They're not elected by us. We don't have the power to vote them out. Even the president can't really fire them individually. Congress doesn't really have much control over them because they fund themselves a lot of the times. And the courts...
And they'll just make up rules that are laws. And it's like, well, too bad. Like, go ahead and vote on it.
Yeah. And in the court, too, so like the Article 3 federal and state courts and district courts, a lot of times they try to check these abuses of power by the executive branch, and the executive branch just ignores them. In the case Missouri v. Biden, in July, I think July 4th actually, a district court ordered administrative state agencies like the FBI and CDC and others like the NIAID and CISA, the CISA, they ordered them to stop censoring speech. And here we are in September 9th, the decision was appealed to the Fifth Circuit Court, and the Fifth Circuit found that all these agencies just ignored the court. They didn't stop, they continued censoring speech all the way as lately as September 9th.
So not only is there not consent, but when we say, hey, stop, you don't have our consent,
they ignore it.
They still do it anyways.
Yeah, and why is government by consent important? Why should people be allowed to basically choose what laws they live under? And I think fundamentally you have to come back to equality. Like, all people are equal by God, by nature, however you want to slice it. All humans are equally human. And that means that no human being has the right to tell another human being what to do. You can't be controlled by anybody.
And no one has the right to rule over someone else.
Yeah.
That's why our founding fathers were you know, really strong when it came to believing God is because they all unilaterally understood that no one is allowed to rule over each other because God is the only one that is allowed to rule over anyone.
Yeah, because then the individual has the right to govern themselves. Right. That's the idea, anyways.
Right. So the progressives, what they basically have done is they have taken, like they preach democracy, like, you know, the people have the power, you know, self-govern, all that kind of stuff. But in reality, they've taken the power from the citizen, the sovereignty of self-governance, and they're putting it elsewhere. So really what they're doing is they're selling us a fake Rolex. So they're making it more of a democracy and promoting democracy, but in reality, they're not. They're subverting it entirely.
Yeah, because I mean, like, it comes a lot from the progressive side. It is like one person, one vote, direct election of senators.
Yep.
It's also really important is that the first progressives were Republicans.
Yeah.
They weren't Democrats.
I just want it to be clear that we're like, when we're talking about these different issues and we use either a Republican or a Democrat or progressive when we're talking about critiques, like, we're not at all trying to come against you and your thoughts on issues. It's the forms of government. It's the skeleton that we're talking about that we're trying to get to.
Yeah, and like the point with all these is like it's you might like direct election of senators and you might not like the Electoral College and you might want one person, one vote instead of the states being represented in the federal government. That's fine because that's more democratic. Mm-hmm. It is. But the problem is the progressives, and these aren't Democrats specifically. Mm-hmm. The first progressives were Republicans.
Yeah, it goes across both parties.
Herbert Crowley and Teddy Roosevelt. He was the leader of the Progressive Party in the 1912 election. They promised all of these democratic reforms that gave more power to the people, but at the same time, they moved all the actual power in government and all the actual governing over to a completely undemocratic branch of government, the fourth branch of government.
Yeah. So what is the fourth branch government?
So the fourth branch of government...
this is getting a little bit into the meat of it here.
Yeah. And the technical term, the best descriptor for it is the administrative state. But there's a ton of other terms that are thrown around that you've probably heard that sound kind of vague, kind of weird.
Yeah, so...
like the deep state.
So the deep state, that is one of the main ones. The swamp, the bureaucracy. There's a lot of things, but the thing is with a lot of those titles is that they're very vague, and they're
kind of clickbaity.
They're kind of clickbait. There's nothing past that. You know, someone will say, you know, oh, you know, the deep state, we got to fight the deep state. You know, the deep state's corrupt.
It's like, well, what is the deep
state?
Well, who are they?
Yeah, that's as far as it goes. No one can tell you what it is. It's because they don't understand really what it is or how it works.
And they can't identify.
And they can't identify
the parts of it.
Yeah, they can't identify it. Yeah. So, for all say all that, the administrative state is the fourth branch of government.
Yeah, and to dispel like myths about what the deep state is, I mean, it is the 3-letter federal executive agencies that are, in name, they're executive agencies. It's like the CDC, the FBI, the ATF, the SEC. You know, you could put together any combination
I believe,
of 3
over
letters.
400 agencies.
Yeah, there's hundreds of them.
Yeah. And there's more created with every president that comes in.
Yeah, absolutely. And they are, at least in name, they're executive agencies. So they're only supposed to enforce the laws of the United States. Mm-hmm. But in reality, and this was the idea all along, is they both write the laws and enforce the laws And they also judge whenever there's a dispute over their laws. They wield all three powers of government: legislative, executive, and judicial. So why is that a problem?
That's a problem because it really just goes against everything American when it comes to the founding principles when it comes to government. I know a lot of people have obviously knows about it, the fourth branch, because they've partaken about it, whether it's with the IRS or whatever agency that is directly involved in their life. But we don't really understand that that is a fourth branch of government, and that traditionally everyone's taught there's three.
Yeah.
Right. We're taught that there's a judicial, the executive, and the legislative, and they all have their duties to do. But the problem is that they're all doing other things, and there's a lot of illegal delegation of power.
Yeah. So maybe it would help to explain why we, in the Constitution, we separated all three powers. Okay. And also why is it dangerous for anyone to do all three?
Yeah. So the reason why we separated power, because the thing is, the founders, other people, authors like J.R.R. Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, a lot of thinkers, really thought about what power is like. And power, in the framers' mind, was something that had to be separated because it is, at least in government, it's a necessary evil to have. And one example I like to use a lot is with, because a lot of people know about Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is written by J.R.R. Tolkien. The main message in Lord of the Rings is the theme is about power and the unlimited power, which can be mirrored in government. Government is a form of ultimate power, and so you have the Ring of Power, right? And it's evil. It's like this thing that they have to destroy, right? The mission is to take Mount Doom. But the thing is, you have all these other parties and factions of people that are trying to acquire the ring because they want to either use it for good or use it for evil. Mm-hmm. And so he got a little further Baggins, and he has this ring. He's the most innocent of saints, of peoples in the Middle Earth, and so they go off on this journey. Yeah. And everyone has all their ideas of what they want to do. Boromir, for example, he wants to use it for good. Yeah. But the thing is the founders knew this, and so did J.R.R. Tolkien. He knew that ultimate power will always corrupt. And so what you see with different characters with Lord of the Rings is you have different characters that try to use it for good, like Boromir, for instance, but instead it turns him, right? And then you have people like Frodo, who is the most innocent person, trying to take this ultimate power, but just having it, just even having it, not even wanting to use it or even wanting to have it, but having it because he felt like it was his duty or whatever. In the end, it 100% corrupts him.
Yeah, like
when he has the ability to destroy it.
Power tends to corrupt. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Yeah. Human beings, we're not perfect.
We're not perfect.
If we were, maybe we could use unlimited power safely. Mm-hmm. But because we're human and we are fallible and we make mistakes, it's too dangerous. And I think most people actually kind of know this intuitively, right? Because like movie Oppenheimer just came out, and there's a big question in that movie. It's like, are humans responsible enough to have the power to destroy everything? And most people are like, probably not. Like no human should have that much power. It's similar thing.
It's very similar. So that was kind of the founders' thought on government. They thought that it was such a terrible thing when it comes to human nature that it had to be divided up. So the founders understood that ultimate power or unlimited power is something that has to be separated. Because the thing is, they call government a necessary evil. So it's something that we have to have, but it is not good. And so we have to, as much as we can, divide it. So divide it in 3 branches, which did a really good job up until about the progressive era.
Yeah, and I think there's a reason why things started to go a little crazy around the progressive era. And that's because they had a fundamentally different understanding of power and humans. They believed, and this is a paraphrase, but it is a quote from Woodrow Wilson, one of the earliest progressives. I don't have it set up because I didn't think about it. But he essentially says that there's no danger in power. There's no danger in power. And he says that the more power a man has and the more freedom of discretion he has to use it, the less likely he is to abuse that power. He says the more power he has, the more he is sobered and elevated by it, which is a radical departure from the idea that human beings can't be trusted with that much power.
Yeah.
They have a very utopian view. It's idealistic. They thought that people were, you could trust them. You could trust them with unlimited power. And they'd only use it in benevolent ways.
Thomas Paine talks about the law because traditionally, through most countries in forms of government, you have like a lot of tyranny, a lot of tyrants, a lot of monarchies, stuff like that. And so it's like, why is it important for the government to follow the law? Like, so what? Like, does it really affect us? Like, why? He has a really good quote in his pamphlet, Common Sense, when he talks about the law. He says, "Some say, where is the King of America? I'll tell you, friend, he reigns above and doth not make havoc of mankind like the royal brute of Britain. Yet that we may not appear to be defective even in earthly honors, let a day be solemnly set apart for proclaiming the charter. Let it be brought forth, placed on the divine law and the word of God. Let a crown be placed thereon, by which the world may know that so far as we approve as monarchy, that in America the law is king. For as in absolute governments the king is the law, so in free countries the law ought to be king, and there ought to be no other."
So that's the concept of rule of law. And I think that's, again, another fundamental principle of America, is that the king doesn't rule, the president doesn't rule, the law rules.
Yeah.
And so whenever these government officials break the law, they are essentially in rebellion to the supreme authority in our country. They have, I mean, it is rebellion to authority, because authority is found in the law, and laws are created by Congress because we, the people, gave them the power to.
Yeah, we consented to letting them govern on our behalf.
Yeah, and that's another thing. Is a lot of these orders and rules and regulations, they exempt people, certain classes of people, from following them. Not only do they exempt special classes from following these regulations, but they also criminalize things in the past, which is also unconstitutional because the Constitution, I'm going to look it up real quick. So Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution clearly says that no ex post facto law shall be passed. What does that mean? It means you can't pass a law that makes someone a criminal for something that happened in the past, post the fact, okay? But lots and lots of these administrative state rules do that very thing. They'll make you a criminal for something that is in the past, that was legal when you did it, but you're still subject to being arrested for it in the future after they have quote-unquote criminalized it.
Yeah, the bump stocks and the arm braces that we talked about is an example of that.
There's no grandfather clause in those rules, which is something normally that when Congress passes a law, they include grandfather clauses because Congress is bound by the Constitution. But the administrative state is extra constitutional. It's outside of the Constitution, so they're not restrained by the Constitution.
And they know what they're doing. Like they're not just like, this isn't all just an accident. Like they understand by saying, oh, well, it's a rule. This isn't legislation, so the Constitution doesn't apply. You know, oh, you know, we're not legislating. You know, it's a bunch of crap.
It's a rose by any other name because they say, okay, so non-delegation says Congress can't grant lawmaking power to anyone else. So they'll say, okay, we're not making laws, we're making rules to carry the force of law.
Right. The reality of the situation is when one of these regulations is broken, it carries the force of law and the consequences. And so they will send law enforcement to come and put you in handcuffs and take you to jail through force. And
I think that's a good probably segue into like these things carry real penalties. So like what happens if you are prosecuted for violating some sort of agency rule? Because in America we have a judicial process. But a little known fact is these administrative agencies, in addition to having their own lawmakers and their own police, they also have their own judges. They have what's called administrative law judges who conduct proceedings. They can sentence you, they can fine you. By the way, all without a jury. In an administrative law hearing, you don't have a trial by jury.
Nope.
The administrative law judge is judge and jury. So
there's no due process. There's no rule of law in the country.
And one of like the things to even think about too is not only do they judge their own cases, but recently the SEC, which is the Securities and Exchange Commission, they had to drop like 42 of the cases that they had pending against citizens and individuals and companies because their in-house prosecutors, their enforcers, illegally gained access to materials belonging to their in-house judges. So if you were hoping for a fair trial, you're not going to get one. Even if you do, if the agency renders a bad decision and you want to appeal to a normal court, an Article 3 court, like a district or circuit or the Supreme Court, well, guess what? Those judges are obligated by a principle called Chevron doctrine to defer to the agency's interpretation on these laws or rules. So even Article 3 judges aren't impartial.
So they all have their own judges, their own legislators, and their own law enforcement.
Yeah,
and so it's not just like you know, oh, they have like 10, 20, 30, 40, 100 law enforcement. They have thousands.
I think,
and for instance, like the FBI, I think it's like around total they have like around 30-some thousand people in the FBI, and it's like around 15,000 are like field agents or like on the ground law enforcement.
Yeah.
So you have 15. That's only one out of like 400-some agencies.
I think that's
so you have literally thousands of law enforcement in this fourth branch of government.
Yeah, I think it's worth kind of going into a little bit of detail on just how much of a police state we actually live in, because there are agencies that you wouldn't expect to have federal agents that do.
Yeah.
And like the IRS, not only do they have their own lawmakers and judges, they also have their own police force. Other agencies like the Environmental Protection Agency, they have their own police. We know ones like the DEA and FBI have their own police, but even ones that you wouldn't expect, like the SEC has their own police.
Yeah.
Let's see, the Federal Trade Commission has their own police. The Bureau of Land Management have their own federal agents. Even people who don't have like special agents that are armed particularly, they have enforcers. Like OSHA has their own enforcement force. They're inspectors who go around and issue fines and citations. And people like the Food and Nutrition Service, and even the Department of Education has their own judges, police. Like all of these agencies have their own judges, police, or enforcement, and policymakers.
That's one thing that a lot of people don't think of. Oh yeah, like the FBI, they have, you know, guys with guns because, you know, they're fighting bad guys, but people don't understand that all of these criminal, you know, agencies that don't necessarily directly deal with criminals also have their own law enforcement.
Yeah, well, like the U.S. Forest Service has their own armed forces, essentially.
And it's literally thousands.
Yeah.
Thousands.
Yeah.
Because it just shows that they are not, it's not just kind of like willy-nilly with them. They're very much enforcing and mean it when they have these laws.
Yeah. And I also think it's important to kind of talk a little bit about, we're not saying that it can be no federal law enforcement, because it is the executive branch's role to enforce the law. The real problem is when these agencies make the rules, send armed men to enforce the rules, and when you're sentenced and charged, have their own judges send you to prison for breaking the rules.
Yeah.
So like we expect people like the ATF and the DEA and the Border Protection and FBI to have their own law enforcement. Some of that's fine, but they also make and adjudicate all these rules in-house.
Yeah.
And even some of them shouldn't really exist. Like the FBI is entrapping American citizens and trying to put them in prison for plots the FBI came up with.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we could go into like little instances of all the agencies and all different. There's a lot. There's the NCLA has a lot of court cases where you can go and find, like individual cases of, like literally there's a whole history of people and organizations. I just read one or listened to one today of the IRS went after. Originally, they were trying to go after like around 100,000 people that had cryptocurrency, and they were only able to end up going after 10,000. I mean, that's 10,000 people. And they basically took their financial records and their cryptocurrency. The IRS thinking at the time was that if you're in cryptocurrency, that you're somehow committing some sort of tax evasion or some sort of tax fraud, and that you're withholding your taxes. So they literally just unilaterally went after 10,000 people. Originally 100,000, but they weren't able to because a judge told them no.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they just took their property and their records and their financial documents.
Yeah. It's completely arbitrary.
Yeah. Why is this important? This is important because probably me and you, this is probably one of the most important, this is the important issue. Everyone sees all the exterior, agendas and problems with the country. Really, the problem is there's no rule of law. We are no longer a government that runs by rule of law. It is the opposite now.
Yeah. And America in practice, it's not a democracy.
Yeah.
It's not
in
a
spirit,
republic.
in ideal, it is those things. It's a republic. It's run by law. But the thing is, practically in everyday government, that's not how it works anymore.
Yeah, I think the quote is Abraham Lincoln. It's government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Mm-hmm. It is literally none of those things anymore since like the early 1900s. Mm-hmm. It's like a weed.
Yeah.
Like we essentially have two different systems of government side by side. We have the constitutional government, the three branches, and then we have the administrative state, mm-hmm. all of these rogue agencies mm-hmm. that completely disregard the constitutional government.
Yeah, and it's slowly choking the life out of liberty. It's taken away governance from not just the federal government, but also state government, because then, like, you can't self-govern your state because there's already regulations and laws made by an agency.
Yeah, a good example of that is when the FBI and CDC censored free speech, they also censored state and local governments. Mm-hmm. They didn't just remove individuals' speech, but actually, like the states of Louisiana and Missouri, their own governments were censored mm-hmm. by these administrative state agencies.
Right. And so this is why in the beginning of the video we were saying, like, this video is not, you know, for Republican issues, not for Democrat issues. This is literally affects everybody. Doesn't matter who you are. Doesn't matter if you're into politics or not. They will rule over you if they so choose to.
Yeah, and they do. And like, there's an agency for almost every industry, for like every aspect of life.
And one of the things that's even worse to even think about is, at least I don't know now because I haven't been in school for about 10 years, but I know at least when our generation, we were in school, that we were brought up being told and taught that, you know, there's the three branches of government, you have a Republican form of government, all these things that are essential to America's government. Mm-hmm. But the thing is now, even then it could have happened then, but like now the thing is, in all practicality and with 100% accuracy, you could not teach that anymore in school. So our generation knows that, hey, this is how the government's supposed to be, and this is how legally, like, we have it. But there's no reason they can't teach in school, oh yeah, you have this, you have a Republican form of government, you can send the government, all that stuff. But we also have the fourth branch of government.
Yeah.
And this is, and they could totally bring up a whole generation of kids learning that this is how things are.
Yeah.
And this is completely fine.
I think that's also like really important is I'm positive most everyone watching this learned about the government in elementary school, high school, wherever. Think about it. You were taught that laws are made in Congress. You were taught that there are three different branches of government that balanced and checked each other. You are still taught this, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah.
And so you got to ask yourself, why were you never taught about the real government, the administrative state?
And how it works.
And how it works.
Yeah.
Why?
And the thing is, if you're not in government or study government, you won't know. Like there's no reason for me. Like, we're tradesmen. We do video production. Why should we know how government works besides what we're taught in school? Mm-hmm. So that's most people. Most people don't know. So we have the legal, constitutional way of living, which is instead of the governed, self-governance, through representation, Republican form of government, which is now being thwarted by the fourth branch, mm-hmm. which is through the executive branch, these executive agencies that now legislate through delegation of Congress. Congress is basically just letting it happen.
Yeah.
And then we have, through Chevron deference, the courts have to uphold it.
Pretty much.
So if that doesn't wake you up a little bit, I don't know what will. But it's insanity.
Yeah, you just gotta decide for yourself. Who knows what's best for your life? Do you know what's best for your life? Or does an unelected, unaccountable administrator who you've never met, who lives thousands of miles away, do they know what's best for your life?
Yeah, it's the same question that we asked ourselves in 1776. And the same question we asked in the Civil War is simply, do you have the right to self-govern yourself?
Yeah.
Do we have the right to self-govern ourselves and be independent of Great Britain? Do black people have the right to self-govern themselves? And that's the same question being asked here, because they don't think that you do.
Yeah, and I think it's also really important. I am not saying that all of these federal bureaucrats are evil, villainous people.
Yes.
That is not the case.
Yeah.
While some of them definitely can be pretty sinister, kind of, the vast majority, they're just doing their jobs. They think that they're doing a good public service. They're civil servants. They think that they are serving the American people. There's a great quote by C.S. Lewis, and he says essentially, I'll paraphrase it, is that the worst form of tyranny might very well be tyranny exercised on behalf of the people that are being oppressed, because the people who are tyrannizing them think that they're doing it for their own good, and so they have the permission of their conscience to keep doing it. It's like, I'm making these decisions for you for your own benefit. Mm-hmm. He said that's even worse than ill-intentioned, he calls them robber barons. So it's not that they're evil people.
Right.
It's the fact that the power that they wield is too dangerous for any one person or group of people to wield, because they're fallible human beings. It's a systemic problem that you're gonna have anytime you empower one agency, in this case, with that much power.
Right.
They're gonna use it for what they think is good, but it's not just.
The problem is in the form of government.
Yeah, it's a systemic problem.
It's the system. It's nothing to do with the people necessarily, or like that they're evil people. It's simply the system of government is not legal.
Yeah. And another thing, just because I know a lot of people are like, okay, well, what is the government going to do if you get rid of some of these agencies? Like if you get rid of, I don't know, like the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, or even the FBI. It's like, we need laws. We need to have laws and enforce them to regulate society. We can still have all that, except the laws need to be passed by Congress. The enforcement needs to come from the executive branch, and the court cases need to be heard by the judicial branch. Mm-hmm.
Because another thing is, a lot of legislation is coming from the administrative agencies, but a lot of it is also coming from the president. The president nowadays is not just the executive, he's also a legislator.
Yeah. Both presidents on both parties.
Yeah, both parties. Because both parties are progressive. And this is not as in saying, because like you have your Obama, your Hillary's, and those are labeled progressives. But historically speaking, since FDR and Wilson, not all, but the majority of our presidents, especially in the 20th century, have been progressive. And simply by progressive, all we mean is the use of these federal agencies in order to legislate, from the presidential administration down to the agencies, or Congress doing it.
Yeah, by progressive, it's they believe in a progressive form of government.
Yeah, form of government.
Which is the government shouldn't have checks and balances. It shouldn't have separation of powers. It shouldn't be limited by a constitution. It should have centralized, unlimited power in order to carry out public good programs. It's the individual must be subservient to the community.
So the idea, for instance, like for us, I mean, I know that we, growing up, we're brought up, Republican stuff, but it's like, realistically, I mean, historically, there's not been a Republican is supposed to be a limited, form of government type of person. There has not been any limited government or a reduction of government. I mean, you can just look at the budgets and the debt. It's only gone up, and that's because no one has truly been a limited government.
Yeah, not for at least a century.
Yeah. So that's what we mean when we say like that both sides are progressive. It's going back to the original progressives in the progressive era and their idea of government, because that's basically the thought process in political circles is that there is no more classical liberal ideas when it comes to government.
Yeah, it's the dominant accepted political philosophy.
Yep.
Is that government has essentially no limits, and it can do whatever it wants without the consent of the governed, as long as it's doing it for their good, their benefit.
For what they think is good.
For what they think is their good.
But the thing is the ultimate good that the government's supposed to be doing is protecting the natural rights of the citizens, and literally by definition it isn't. There's a couple main things we need. One, we need Congress to stop delegating its power, because it has no authority to do that in the Constitution. There's no consent given of the people. And so that is one thing that would help stop this overreach of power. The other thing that would greatly reduce it is simply getting rid of a lot of these agencies. So if they're not there, they can't do all this legislating illegally. So the problem is there hasn't been a whole lot of, even just in conservative media and circles, there hasn't been a lot of talk about administrative state. And so what we need is a president that is willing and knows how to remove and get rid of these agencies. Not all of them, because there's plenty of departments in the government and the executive branch that are legal, but at least half or more of them are unneeded and illegal.
Yeah.
So what we need is a president that is willing to do what he needs to do, and that isn't a progressive when it comes to the form of government. Someone who actually believes in the founding principles of America and self-governance and rule of law, and is willing to actually do it, not just say it. Because one of the problems we have is like President Trump did a really good job at uncovering and making mainstream, right? He calls the swamp or the deep state, which he never went into detail of what that was.
No.
Not really. He never talks about the root of it, the history of it, anything like that. And I don't know if he does or doesn't. I don't know. But he at least brought into the light that there is this evil entity in the government that is, calling the shots. But recently, the only other people that have really been vocal about it has been some libertarians. Recently, we've had presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy has given the most detail of what the swamp or the deep state is, and not just saying, they're just these people that we need to go fight. He tells you that they're the administrative state, they are these agencies. He's if you look at his website, he talks about which ones are the ones that he's looking to remove, why they need to be removed, and how he can remove them legally as the United States president.
Yeah.
Because like I said before, it is these are mostly under the executive branch, and so it is the president's job to rein in these people. The idea that these agencies have free reign and don't have anyone to answer to is incorrect, because the president is the one that they answer to. The problem is a lot of presidents like to use them to push their agendas and their legislation from the executive branch.
Yeah, and it's very hard because most presidents, they accept it as the status quo. Like, this is how presidents...
Because it is the status quo.
It is now the status quo, yeah.
Up to date.
Like, oh, presidents rule by executive order, which necessarily means they rule through the administrative state. Because who carries out their orders but the administrative state?
Yeah.
So they need to recognize that's not how the presidency is supposed to work. They're not dictators. They're supposed to simply execute the laws that Congress passes. And it's very hard to do when most presidents are used to having that kind of power, and they like having that kind of power. We also have to do our job. We, the people, have been very apathetic and very complacent and let all of this happen under our watch. And a big part of that's just because we don't know. Like, we don't know these things. The
first problem to fixing a problem is understanding there is a problem.
Exactly. So learning about the problem and then raising awareness about the problem. And there's a lot of great resources, which I guess we'll put in some description or links, but I'll rattle off a couple, because this fight has been going on for decades already. There's an organization called the New Civil Liberties Alliance, and they're a nonprofit, a legal group that defends American civil liberties from the administrative state. They're a great resource to go check out and support them. Other people like Hillsdale College has wonderful free online courses that can teach you kind of the history and the philosophy behind all this stuff. Heritage Foundation is also good.
Yeah, definitely don't let this be the end of learning when it comes to about the administrative state and the form of government we have today. We have to learn about it, everybody in America. And also the thing that we need to do as Americans is to start electing people that represent that form of government, a Republican form of government. We have been swayed by lots of presidents that have agendas and things that they pander to us, saying, oh, we're going to fix this problem, we're going to, give you, a wall, we're going to give you free health care, we're going to give you all these things. But little do you know that they're trading you that stuff for your self-governance. And I think no matter who you are on the spectrum of what you believe politically, we all believe in self-governance. That's the one thing that unites us, and that's the one thing that we no longer vote for anymore. We no longer vote for people. A lot of them do say that they do, or they present it as if they are, but it's really not that hard to look and see, are they promoting and using the administrative state for their agendas? Are they passing a bunch of executive orders and using agencies to enforce them illegally? How many times have they said, we can do it without Congress?
Yeah.
That's stuff like that. It's really not hard to see who actually is for self-governance and who is for administrative state form of government.
Anytime any president says, I can do this without Congress, I can circumvent Congress, what they're actually saying is, I can go around the people. I can do this without the people. I can do it on my own.
And they've done a good job. A lot of presidents have done a good job of painting Congress as the bad guys, as an issue.
Is a problem, absolutely.
They have their own problems, but the thing is the core is that Congress is a representation of the people, and yes, Congress is complicit, and they need to stop delegating. But the thing is, any president that says we're going to go around Congress because they're too slow, because they're not saying, oh, we're going around Congress because they're delegating power. They say no because it's too slow, because, you know, whatever reason that they have to say is the reason why they say they're going around Congress. So anyone that is saying we're going to go around you and me and you, to get whatever it is they want to get done, you can't fall for that. Even if it's something that you like, right? What's that quote?
The Thomas Paine quote? Yeah,
the Thomas Paine quote.
There's a lot of ideas to that same effect, but it's paraphrasing something like he that would secure his own liberty must guard even his enemy from oppression.
Yes, that's
or
it.
If he fails this duty, he will set a precedent that will eventually reach to him.
Right.
So if like the federal government comes in and illegally tries to ban some type of drug, like, okay, maybe you don't like drugs, but you have to ask yourself, is what they're doing legal? Like, you can have a debate on whether certain drugs should be legal, but that should happen in Congress. It shouldn't happen unilaterally by an arbitrary agency.
Yeah.
Or same thing with like certain firearm accessories, like braces. It's like, okay, we can have a debate if those should be legal or not, but that needs to happen.
But we need to have
the people need. We need to have
the debate, not the government.
Yeah.
Not people that doesn't represent us.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So that's something else we need to do. And so kind of pinpointing more on this next presidential election, we have a bunch of candidates that have come forward. I will say that Vivek Ramaswamy is the only candidate that I know of that has named what the problem is. He's addressed that there's a problem, and he's also outlined his solution of how he's going to fix the problem in detail, and he's named the names of the agencies that he's going to fix.
Yeah.
And not just fix, I'm sorry, that's the wrong term, because a lot of like DeSantis and Trump and some of these other candidates have said they're going to reform agencies, which they have done in the past. That didn't work. But Vivek is the only one that is not just looking to reform like Donald Trump and DeSantis and a lot of these other candidates. He is simply going to remove these agencies.
Yeah.
I think Vivek is correct when he says that we are in a 1776 moment, because this country, you can just feel that we're at a breaking point, and that's something that he has mentioned, and it's something that I saw before I even knew who he was. And when we were researching this in the past like 4 or 5 years, you can just see that there's like it's not like a conspiracy or anything like that. It's simply a historical fact that in the past, when Americans have been asked the question, do you want to self-govern? The answer's always been yes, we want to self-govern. So
kind of on that note, a lot of candidates, and particularly Republican candidates, do kind of give lip service to limited government, but in practice, none of them actually govern that way. They all govern like big government progressives for the most part. And so you can just look.
Can you give a couple of examples just quickly with our last Republican president of that?
Yeah. And when you contrast his record with at least Vivek's platform, obviously Vivek doesn't have a record yet. And I will say, like, first of all, you don't want to trust politicians in the first place. You have to be, you should have a healthy suspicion of them. Anyone who wants that power, you should be suspicious of. So, like, if you contrast President Trump's record when he was in office with the platform of someone like Vivek, President Trump, he campaigned on draining the swamp. And so you have to look, okay, did that actually happen? Now that we kind of know what the swamp is. So President Trump issued an executive order to one of his subordinates to identify unnecessary executive agencies for them to abolish. They identified 19 minor agencies that no one's ever heard of, and they failed to get rid of a single one. So as far as I have seen, there's not been a single federal agency that was eliminated during his White House. And then other examples where...
And just if I can interject at one point is like, for instance, Donald, he may think that, oh, because I have fired these people and that people, that to him that is draining the swamp, in all fairness.
Yeah, and that's the claim, is that he's drained the swamp by replacing the director of the FBI or replacing the previous secretary of the Department of Education, in which case Trump fired James Comey and installed Christopher Wray, the new FBI director. The problem is that the current FBI director is just as corrupt as all the previous ones. I mean, under his FBI, the FBI violated the First Amendment. They labeled veterans and parents as domestic terrorists for doing no crimes. They entrapped innocent Americans in the Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping plot. This isn't, I'm not just saying this, I have to stress that. The court found the FBI violated the First Amendment. And you just have to look at, they carried out a raid on Trump's own house. Whether you think that was right or wrong, you can make up your own mind. But the point is that he failed to prevent FBI corruption, just like he failed to prevent Department of Education corruption.
And we don't spend too much time on that, but there's a few instances, and then also, you know, not only did that happen, but Republicans also have used the administrative state for their own advantage and their own policies and their own, you know, ideas. So maybe just give a couple examples of that.
Yeah, a couple examples of that would be during the pandemic is the most obvious example. President Trump ordered the CDC to ban evictions. And so that is an executive administrative state agency, the CDC, who made it illegal for property owners to evict their renters who weren't paying rent. Why does the Center for Disease and Control have anything to do with property rights? I don't know. Things like...
They're not a legislator. They have no legal authority to legislate and to make a rule like that has the weight of a law and putting you in jail.
Yeah.
Or fines.
Yeah, and just in case anyone thinks I'm picking on Trump too hard, Biden did the exact same unconstitutional executive order where he ordered the CDC to ban evictions, even though he knew the Supreme Court had already stated that that was unconstitutional. And they, in fact, did rule that the CDC doing that was unconstitutional. A similar thing, both Trump and Biden ordered unconstitutional executive orders that ordered the ATF to rewrite the law.
And this is just a good example of showing that this isn't about left to right policies or, oh, you know, this issue, you know, is a Republican issue, so yeah, let's fight for that, or this Democrats issue, let's fight for that. This is simply showing the structure of government and how it's run and how it's the same.
Yeah, and the solutions to it too. So like going back to like the Department of Education, now like a lot of people on the right didn't like what the Department of Education was doing before President Trump because they felt they were pushing hard left agenda onto schools. And under President Trump, he replaced the secretary. He fired like 7% of the employees, like reduced it by like 400 employees, and put in someone who would push hard, but I don't know if they're hard right, but more right-leaning views onto schools, and would withhold federal funding from schools that taught anything like CRT. So that is using the exact same methods just for the right side or the left side. They're both using something that shouldn't exist, federal bribery of independent schools to push an agenda that on the American people that should be local.
And this is a good segue into kind of the trickle down of administrative authoritarianism, which it starts in the executive branch. You got the executive who has like the legislation or the agenda or whatever it is that they push to their executive agencies, who then through money grants from the governmental grants or other means bribe or force and push these agendas to the people, and then you see that happen into life. Like for example, with the CDC, an example with the Department of Education.
Yeah, yeah, and so like all of these attempts by past presidents to fix corruption by reforming these administrative state agencies, they're just completely ineffective. Because first of all, as soon as they leave office, the next guy comes in and undoes all their policies and replaces the heads of these agencies with their own loyalists, and then they push their agenda. And
this is why the founders construed the way laws are supposed to work and how they're supposed to be made to be extremely difficult and take a lot of time, because then they're set in stone and they're very hard to undo.
Yeah.
And this new progressive way of legislating through the executive and through these agencies is the opposite. It's quick money. It comes and it goes.
And they change their minds all the time.
Exactly.
All the time. And that is why, like, Vivek has stood out to me, because he hasn't been talking about pushing his agendas through the administrative state and just replacing the directors and the secretaries and the chiefs with his own people. He's been talking about completely getting rid of, like, the Department of Education, the FBI, the ATF, the CDC.
He has a whole list.
A whole list.
Yeah. And you know, really, we're gonna have to look at all the candidates and see, you know, what all they're really saying and what they're pushing. But so far, he seems to be the only one that is even remotely on this topic.
He's the only one who's made it the #1 top priority of his entire campaign.
Yeah.
I've seen in interviews, he said, this is the first thing that I'll do when I get into office. Where some other candidates have spoken about the issue, it's never been their main priority, and they haven't spoken as in depth. They haven't given as many plans. So
they haven't shown that they understand the historically the progressive philosophy behind it, and just like the real, like, detailed analysis of the administrative state and how it is the #1 danger in America right now.
It is.
For the past 100 years.
Yeah, it is the most tyrannical part of our government. And it almost precisely because it's the most powerful part of our government. And it's the least democratic and the least Republican. So it's no surprise that it's the biggest problem and the biggest threat. Like whenever government oppression happens, the tools that they use 9 times out of 10 is the administrative state.
This is something we have been studying for the past probably roughly 5 years. Up until this point, we have not seen any candidates that have any sort of chance of actually winning a race, or even really at all just talking about this issue in depth. It's all been very top layer, if it's ever even spoken about. So we thought this would be important for people to know, because a lot of people just don't know, and some people may know you may have heard, you know, the term the deep state, the administrative state, you know, but you may not really know what it is.
Yeah, it's completely understandable if someone doesn't know exactly what it is, because it's really hard to understand.
Yeah.
Like that quote from Wilson you gave earlier, it's designed to be boring and complicated. And it's our job as American citizens to try to understand it, and think about what to do about it. And I can't stress this enough, how it's not a left and right issue. It's not Republicans versus Democrats. This problem started with Republicans. It was made worse by Democrats. And they both, to this day, continue to wield powers they shouldn't. So it really comes down to the state on one side and the American people on the other side.
The question is simply, do you want to be able to self-govern yourself, or is the state going to do that?
Yeah. Yeah, and if you want government of the people, by the people, and for the people, the administrative state should concern you, because it's completely unaccountable to the people.
It's extremely concerning, and people, we know they feel it, and the reason why we know is because we see actions that happen because of it. When you have people that, storm the Capitol, a lot of these riots, a lot of things that we see happen is effects of people feeling that weed choking the plant of freedom and self-governance. And you're just going to see it more and more as more agencies come out. People not having any faith in their votes and voting. Voting is the one way that we as people wield government. And if we don't have that, we just have a totally rogue government.
Yeah, and that's also a pretty important point.
And there's no other way to control a government besides force.
Yeah, because it's been a big topic lately, especially is elections and voting rights, right?
Yep.
And it's like elections won't matter and voting rights won't matter until the people that we elect through voting are the ones who actually do the governing. And right now that's not the case.
Yep.
And
people that we elect need to be the ones that actually govern the country.
If you care about election integrity, like if you're on the right and you care about having free and fair elections, this should matter to you, because the results of the elections won't change very much as long as the administrative state is doing most of the governing. And say you're on the left and you care about access to ballots and voting rights for different types of people, different groups of people, and if that's really important to you, then this should also be really important to you, because their vote won't really matter until the people they vote for are the ones making the decisions. Because right now the people they're voting for don't make the actual decisions that drive government policy.
Yep. So all that to say, we hope that everyone watches this video with an open mind and understand that we're not kind of a place of trying to scrutinize any political parties or individuals or anything like that. It's simply looking at an overview of what traditionally and legally is the form and skeleton of government that America is founded on, and just realizing and diagnosing the problem of why that's not the case anymore. Hopefully this topic and discussion was insightful to you. That's really all we wanted to do with this video, is simply inform people that may be unaware, or maybe you kind of have an idea and maybe you've heard some of the terms, or you just feel the effects of the administrative state and you just couldn't put your finger on it. Hopefully this kind of helps you understand a little more and gives you some tools to go out and do some more research on the topic. Well, I think that's it.
All right, sounds good.
All right, see you later.